Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your interest in gender dignity, unique and equal. If you've been following this show, then you know that I've been chronicling certain events in 2015. And in 2015, awareness did increase. However, that did not translate into acceptance. In 2015, our violence increased by 31%. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in 2016 across the country and what's going on in Maine. And I have a very special guest tonight, Zack Pakkonen, who's an attorney from Portland, Maine. And we're going to learn a little bit about Zack, his personal life, and then we're going to do something different on this program and transition and talk about issues that are a little bit deeper than usual. As usual, I want to introduce you to ordinary, normal folks who are trans and who are living in your communities, just so that you get acclimated to that we're just like everybody else. That's the purpose of this program. So thank you, and I'm going to start off now by asking Zack to tell us a little bit about himself and what he does for work.
Sure, I'm a lawyer in Portland, Maine. I am a solo practitioner. My range of practice is family law. I do some criminal defense, a lot of child protective work, and I'm a guardian ad litem, so I work with the courts and with young children in a variety of family law and foster care situations. I also am on the executive committee of the National LGBT Bar Association's Family Law Institute, and as part of that, I work with family law lawyers all across the country.
Wow, Zack. I know you do a lot with the family law. Can I ask a little bit how it is that you got interested in being a lawyer in the first place?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question. I mean, I could say I went to law school because I got a degree in linguistics from the University of Southern Maine. I didn't want to do language pathology or some of the other things you could do with it, so I went to law school because I didn't know what else to do with my degree. And I got there and I actually thought it was very interesting. So.
Okay. Can I ask a personal question about your transition? Because this is the first part of the program.
Yeah.
Were you, when you were going to college, were you transitioned already, or?
No, I didn't transition until I was actually admitted to the bar and a practicing lawyer.
Okay.
I went through college and law school, at least as people viewed me as a female person. And then, I became a lawyer, became admitted to the bar, and worked at a small firm for a short amount of time. And I ended up leaving that job because I knew I wanted to transition. So I practiced in the Maine courts for a small amount of time as, female, or at least female appearing, and then I transitioned to male. I believe I've been a lawyer for about 2 years at that point.
Okay.
1 to 2 years.
And how was that going through that while you were going to school and?
It was interesting. The reason why I'm glad that I transitioned as an adult and after college is I got to experience a little bit of practicing in the courts and being a lawyer as a female-bodied person, and also now as a male person, because the way that men and women are treated in society and in the court system is a little different. I don't mean the way that the courts themselves treat people, but just the way that everyone in society treats men and women, things like opening doors and the way that men sometimes relate to each other when you're in groups of men. And seeing that as a lawyer it's fascinating, and it's not a life experience that you can, that most people can get. You can get any other way.
I agree, yeah. Can I ask how old you were when you transitioned?
Sure, I was about 30.
Okay, so you certainly do know the difference with privilege. I could actually do a whole show on privilege, I think. Yes, yeah. Great. I am curious too what your ultimate ambition is in terms of what your goals are as personally, professionally.
I'm pretty happy doing what I'm doing. I mean, I guess my goal is just to be a lawyer and just be treated like everybody else and every other lawyer in the system. It's, I don't necessarily have a particular ambition or goal related to being a transgender person.
Okay. I do know that you're one of the top 40 lawyers in Maine. Is that?
No.
Okay.
Last year I was named, the National LGBT Bar Association named me one of their 40 under 40.
Wonderful.
It was 2015.
That's quite an honor, since there are quite a few lawyers, at least in Maine. So Zach, as I mean, you know what's going on in the world, so we're gonna transition this a little bit and get into some deeper issues. And I know you're traveling to North Carolina a lot. Right now, we've got an awful lot going on. You know, there was the awareness, and now I feel that templates are sort of being created, and then once they're created, it can be really difficult to bring them down. And we've got something pretty ambitious going on in North Carolina, and I'm hoping you'll explain that, and then how that relates to us here in Maine.
Sure, I can talk a little bit. I'm actually traveling in a few weeks to North Carolina for a conference, and what has happened in North Carolina is that their legislature and their government has imposed a law. It's targeting LGBT people generally, LGBTQ people.
All right.
And it does a couple of things. I mean, one of the things it does is it keeps any city or town from passing an ordinance, a non-discrimination ordinance. And it's not just LGBTQ people, it also affects veterans, discrimination laws, or ordinances about veterans. But it also has a requirement that transgender people have to use a bathroom that matches the gender on their birth certificate, which is a problem for a lot of transgender people because a lot of transgender people can't change their birth certificates for a lot of reasons. I mean, one reason, some people were born in states where you can't change your birth certificate at all. Some people haven't had what society has considered the proper procedures to change the birth certificate because they can't afford them, or there might be a bunch of reasons why people can't do that, medical or other reasons. And so you're forcing a bunch of people who appear, I mean, for example, some people, a transgender woman would appear to everyone and is a woman. And the government in North Carolina is now saying that woman has to use the men's bathroom, which is obviously a very unsafe situation for that woman. So that's a concern. I know that there's been a lawsuit filed by ACLU and Lambda Legal about that law, so we don't know what's going to happen.
Okay. Now, I feel, I think this is really important to bring up because often when I hear talks about these bathroom issues, I often only hear about trans women.
Yes.
And they don't talk about trans men.
Yes.
And we're both trans men, and we look like men. And so that law then would require us to use the female bathroom, is that right?
It depends on what sex you have on your birth certificate, technically. But yes, a lot of the problems with these laws is that lawmakers are reacting to an imaginary fear about transgender. Transgender women in a women's bathroom, and the imaginary fear is that these women are predators, which is not true.
Right.
In fact, I do not believe there is a single reported instance of a transgender person attacking, or a transgender woman attacking someone in a bathroom.
However, they've been attacked.
They are attacked quite often. But as far as transgender men, the lawmakers don't realize that what they're doing by passing these laws is they're actually putting men into the women's bathroom.
Right.
So it's an unintended consequence of those laws.
Exactly. It is unintended because in my particular, you brought something up, I think that's a great point. I was born in Kentucky. I have my license, my Medicare card, Social Security card, and even my passport all say male. And being in Kentucky, they will not change my birth certificate. So everything except for my birth certificate is changed. So I would be required then to use the North Carolina bathroom.
The women's, which is an interesting situation because for the purposes of the federal government, you are male, you have a male passport, but for the purposes of North Carolina, they're saying essentially nothing can change other, from what is on your birth certificate. And what's on your birth certificate, a birth certificate, first of all, is what is considered a ministerial act. It's not a court order. It's something that someone does to record a birth. I mean, a division in Maine, it's Vital Records, which is a division of the Department of Health and Human Services, that issue all vital records, including birth certificates. And all states have an agency that does vital records. So this is an administrative action. And the states that have these sorts of laws are saying that completely arbitrary administrative act, a baby is born and some doctor has looked at the baby and made a decision, the baby is male or female, that governs what that person is for their entire life and what they can do. And that's obviously problematic.
Oh, absolutely. Wow. So really, I mean, I don't carry my birth certificate around. I
No,
don't know
nor
many
do
people
I.
who do. So in theory, I think of folks even sitting in this audience right now who are male, who look very much like us. So how are they going to enforce this in theory? I mean, because anyone, any male could walk into a female bathroom and say, well, I'm trans.
The only way that this law is going to be enforced is that somebody walks into a bathroom and someone else feels that they don't belong there, and then they're questioned. And so it's really targeting people who don't pass.
Who don't pass.
Or who don't meet the societal expectations of what a man or a woman should look like.
Okay.
So my expectation would be a lot of transgender men are never going to be questioned in a bathroom because no one will have any reason to question why they're there. And same thing with a lot of transgender women, but there are people who are going to be targeted.
Yes, who don't pass.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. See, as far as I'm concerned, I am a trauma survivor myself, and I think personally the issue is safety in the bathrooms, because quite frankly, even predators need to pee. They do.
They do.
And I think as a trauma survivor, we need trauma-sensitive bathrooms and trauma-sensitive changing rooms, and that's the real issue, is safety. And safety for the trans person because they're the ones getting attacked, and I think that really needs to be emphasized. So I think this is fascinating. It'll be interesting how this happens, how this plays out, but once they've created a template, it does make it easier, though, to come around and do that. So what's going on in Maine? What are the rules here in Maine right now?
The Maine Human Rights Act says that you can't treat someone differently because of their gender identity. So
Okay.
you have to treat, for example, a transgender man just like any other man.
Okay.
So that means you can't look at a transgender man or a transgender woman and say, you can't use this bathroom because you're transgender.
Okay.
And that's the law in Maine. We have had bathroom bills, actually, in the last several years, we've had bathroom bills that have they've been introduced, but they certainly haven't gone anywhere.
Okay.
And I would hope that they wouldn't.
I would hope that they wouldn't either, but one never knows.
Yeah, one never knows.
Well, I guess I'm thinking, in Maine we are protected, our trans status is protected. So I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking of our viewers and people who are owning a business and coming from the idea that they really want to do the right thing by the LGBT community. Can you just kind of give us what do they need to know about discrimination, hiring, firing? What are their rights and responsibilities? What are ours?
The first thing I would tell any business owner is try to figure out what you don't know, and that's a very hard thing to do. So I would suggest if a business owner has some questions about this to reach out to one of the local transgender organizations for some training.
Yeah.
So that they can figure out what they don't know.
Okay.
And if it's a large business, then they should have some sort of policy in place about what to do if an employee says that they're transitioning, or if they have a transgender employee, and some of the local organizations like Maine Transnet can help them with those policies.
Okay. Can a business out you? I mean, if I'm trans and I pass and I don't want, my coworkers to know.
No. A business, they should not out one of their employees.
Okay.
For a couple of reasons. One, they're treating that transgender employee differently than they would any other employee.
Fair enough, yeah.
So it would be different treatment under the Maine Human Rights Act. The other issue is that you can argue that somebody's transgender status might be protected medical information, say, that would be in their employment file. And then there could be a bunch of federal laws that the employer could be violating if they out their employee.
Gotcha.
There's no reason for an employer to do that.
Right. Can you tell us maybe what hospitals should be keeping in mind too? Because probably similar, but.
Hospitals, they're subject to HIPAA. So medical information that's in someone's file is private, and they can't disclose it to anyone unless there's an authorization. Hospitals should, I would say that they should make every effort to protect a transgender person's status, and probably to make a patient comfortable, they should do things like when someone comes in, maybe they should be asking all patients for preferred pronouns, or making sure somebody's preferred name is reflected on the board if they come into the emergency room, for example, or those sorts of things, and make sure that they're respectful. And I'd also reach out to hospitals should also be trying to get some training from trans organizations, make sure they're doing it right.
I think that's a great idea. Now, the last guest that I had, he talked at great length. He was part of the recovery community and had gotten some hospitalization, and he felt like he was outed because he kept getting private rooms, and he wasn't allowed to, and he passed, definitely. He had a long beard and was bald and everything. And then people started kind of knowing something was up just because of treating him so differently.
Yeah.
Can hospitals do that? Can they?
If they're treating him differently because he was transgender, then no, they can't do that.
He was he had to have a separate individual room, is what he had said on the show. And I was wondering, because I've actually heard some instances of people in the emergency room waiting for rooms because they will not set folks up in a twin room. And they'll make them wait literally for a long time to get a private room. So is that a legal thing that they can do?
Under the Maine Human Rights Act, they cannot treat a transgender person differently just because of their gender identity. So again, no.
So they can't do that?
No,
Okay.
they should be treating transgender men just like any other man and transgender women just like any other woman.
So to house them like
Right.
everybody else, okay.
Unless if the patient requests a private room for various,
Sure.
for a number of reasons, then the hospital probably could do that. But my guess is that the transgender people aren't requesting that.
No.
It's being done because the hospital's uncomfortable.
Because they're uncomfortable. And just for their information, if they're viewing
Yeah.
this, then that's not acceptable.
No, that would not be an acceptable practice for a
Okay.
hospital.
Okay. If you did feel like I've applied for a few jobs and I really don't want to out myself, but because I have a social work background, I have to do a background check, and therefore I wound up having to out myself. Is that required that a person has to out themselves in an interview or anything like that?
No, there are certain questions that employers can't ask in interviews, and they're considered discriminatory questions, and most of the outing questions would probably be discriminatory
Okay.
questions. Things like background checks, though. I always tell my clients, if you have to do a background check and you're required to list former names, list the former names.
And that's what I do.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's hard to know if you don't get the job, if that's because of the former names listed, but if you don't list them, they do have a legitimate
Then
reason.
they would have a legitimate reason.
Yeah.
Now, Zach, I mean, I hate to do this because we are a bit of a litigious folks. And say someone is very confident they're being discriminated against. Could you give some guidance, maybe, how to document these things? Or I mean, I think, of course, just talk to the person or go to human resources. I prefer mediation. So I'm wondering if you can address some of that. And then, of course, you have to hold people accountable, and sometimes it's absolutely appropriate to take someone to court or whatever. But can you just talk about maybe some of the different strategies a person can use?
Sure. Well, what I would do first is if someone thinks that they're being discriminated against at work, I would encourage them to talk to their supervisor. I mean, if the supervisor is the problem, then
You have to go up.
go up. If your company has a policy, an anti-discrimination policy, follow that policy and make sure you are doing what you need to do.
Okay.
But documenting is the key.
Okay.
What I would tell people to do is to keep a log of everything that happens at work. And if you think you're being discriminated against, write down what date the incident happened, what happened, and everybody who was present.
Yeah.
Because you're going to want those people to be able to tell about what happened, so it's not just your word against your employer.
Right. I even find when I have a conversation, maybe I follow up with an email because I think emails are just really great. I mean,
Yes.
So that's a great way to document.
Yes.
Good old emails.
That's a very, very lawyerly
Very
also
lawyerly.
thing to do. You have the conversation, and then you follow up with a letter or an email. Yes,
Okay.
that's also a really good practice.
Okay. Now, can you tell us the difference? Because I'm sure some folks out there don't know the difference, like between mediation and seeking out a lawyer. So.
Well, mediation can take place in a number of ways. I mean, sometimes some large employers have an advocate or someone who can serve as a mediator for employment disputes, or you could have a lawyer at mediation. But sometimes you want to try to mediate your situation and solve it without going to court. It might be the best way to do it for your own peace of mind.
Sure. And that's a great way to hold someone accountable as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I tend to think litigation is the last resort
Right.
in
Right.
most things. I mean, it tends to save your mental health to be able to sit down and work out something you can live with.
Yeah. I think, yes, going to court is a very difficult thing.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add about what's going on? I know that August 31st, there's Trans Day of Visibility. And I know that it's been floating around Facebook to go up to Augusta because I was under the impression that our laws in Maine were maybe getting challenged a bit. Is that correct? Especially regarding, I think, kids in schools.
Yes,
Okay.
I can talk a little bit about the kids in schools. So the Maine Human Rights Act that I talked about, it covers gender identity.
Okay.
Technically, it's under sexual orientation in Maine, which isn't accurate, but
Right.
that's where it is in the law. But the Maine Human Rights Act applies to schools. I mean, a lot of states, it does not, their anti-discrimination law doesn't apply to schools, but Maine's does. And the Maine Human Rights Commission is the agency that is in charge of enforcing, in some ways, their own law.
Okay.
So they put out something called a council memo that talks about what the law means to schools.
Okay.
It's on their website, and anybody who's curious or has a child in school, a transgender child, should go look this up and
Okay.
see what schools can do. But it just clarifies that things like school bathrooms and locker rooms, as I said, a transgender man or boy treated like a boy, transgender girl treated like a girl. But it talks about a variety of situations. And the Maine Human Rights Commission had tried to put out a guidance, and for a number of reasons that didn't go forward.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say that the laws have actually been challenged,
Oh, okay.
but they are in place, and there was some further clarification that schools need.
Okay, can you go on a little bit more about some of that Because some of the things I've heard, I hope it's okay to play devil's advocate a bit, and if it's
Absolutely.
not comfortable, just, go ahead. But if, is it feasible, could a high school student, a high school boy, just come in and say, well, I feel like I'm a trans girl today? Or if
No.
He could not, so this has to be somehow documented?
There
or?
has to be documentation. It has to be consistent with I believe the language, and I'm probably going to get it wrong because it's off the top of my head, but it's something like a consistent assertion
Okay.
of someone's gender identity. The school can't ask for medical records, so they can't say, give me your doctor's note.
Right.
But it has to be somebody, for example, a boy, well, a boy it wouldn't apply to a boy, but somebody who says they are a transgender girl has to be consistently asserting
Right.
that they are transgender and that they are a girl.
Okay.
So
So it's not like they could just show up at school and say, hey, guess what?
absolutely not.
Okay, so that's an unwarranted fear, I think, on some
Yes.
people's part.
Absolutely not.
Now, what about even locker rooms for adults in Maine? Could someone feasibly do that? Could they decide that because I don't know that there's any criteria. I do use a men's locker room. And unfortunately, I read about someone in Georgia who waltzed in and disrobed to make a point. And he wasn't trans, and he wasn't even trying to pretend he was. He was just trying to prove a point, which actually proves my point that we have an illusion of safety.
Right.
But can you tell me about that a little bit? Or
I don't think that's a realistic scenario in Maine either, because the issue, well, let's say somebody who has a locker room, like a gym, they're a place of public accommodation.
Okay.
So they're covered by the Maine Human Rights Act, and they can't treat people differently because of their gender identity. That person that you're talking about, who is someone who identifies as a man and decides to go into the women's locker room, the institution throws them out. They're not treating them differently because of their gender identity.
Right, because they're being a predator.
Right, they are not a transgender person. So the law is there to protect people who are transgender people who are trying to use facilities that are consistent with their gender identity. And it's not intended to, and it's not going to protect somebody who wants to access a locker room for some kind of impermissible reason.
Right. And, you know, we do have foolish people doing that. So if they do that, they're going to be subject to some legal action.
Right, and if they tried to file a complaint under the Maine Human Rights Act, my
It wouldn't
guess
be
is
valid.
right. It wouldn't go anywhere because they're not being discriminated against because of their gender identity.
Okay. Zach, I know this is a little bit off, but can we talk a little bit about a hate crime or what would constitute a hate crime in Maine?
I don't know. That's an area of law I don't know a lot about.
Okay.
If it's my understanding is if it's somebody does or commits a crime against someone else and it's a personal crime that's motivated by some sort of hate or animus about someone's protected status, then certain things can happen and they can file, the AG's office can file a civil lawsuit or take other actions against the person.
Okay.
So, but I don't know a lot about that area.
But you don't, okay, so
Yeah.
we'll skip over on that.
Yeah.
What else could you do to inform viewers maybe of what LGBT folks should know, or what should we do if we start maybe being a little afraid that things are kind of coming in that are going to be similar to North Carolina going on? What would be the best course of action?
I think we should be vigilant because it is something that could happen in Maine. You know, I hope it wouldn't. We have been down that road before, and I think our legislature realized that that was not the right kind of bill for Maine.
It isn't, but at the moment, right now, in half the country, it is, in my understanding, perfectly legal to discriminate against LGBT folks in terms of housing, in terms of employment.
Well, yes, it is certainly, and actually, I don't know if it's exactly half of the country, but there's even more ability legally in the country to discriminate against transgender people specifically.
And it almost seems very much a target towards trans folks.
Yes.
Yes. That I feel like our society, I think, is a bit more accepting of LGB and not so accepting of gender diversity, that we're not quite there yet.
No, we are not there yet.
Okay.
I think most people, we're such a small portion of the population that a lot of people have never met a transgender person or they're not aware that they have. So it's something that's scary and unfamiliar to most people. But once most people get to know transgender people, I think that they will become more accepting like they are with lesbian, gay, or to some degree bisexual people also.
Yes, that's the hope of this program. So
Yeah.
I guess in some ways I'm going to go back to learning a little bit more about you. Did you grow up in Maine, Zach?
I did. I grew up in Bucksport.
Bucksport, okay,
Yeah.
that's a small town.
It's a pretty small town.
Yes, I think of Buxton, Bucksport. It's not, it's
No,
further up.
Bucksport it's equally between Bangor and Ellsworth.
Oh, okay, okay.
People know it mostly for Fort Knox, and there's the Foot, and it's on the road to Bar Harbor.
Okay.
So.
So in a safe way, Zach, that feels good to you. Tell us a little bit about your story. I mean, your journey. How, I mean, maybe when you knew and how this came to be for you.
I think I probably knew when I was 3 or 4 because I once said to my mother, I remember distinctly, that I told her I must have been a character in a book because I couldn't be real. And I think she freaked out about that. But okay. what I really meant is I didn't feel like I fit. And so it's something I knew at a very early age. Not all transgender people do know.
Right.
But I fit that, what is considered the stereotypical story in that sense. And it's something that I knew, growing up and through college, but it's not something I really thought I had much of an option about. So I didn't decide to do anything about it until I was a lawyer. It got to a point that it was so difficult and so painful that I knew I had to do something.
Was it hard? I mean, so do you have the dysphoria that comes with being, because some trans folks don't have dysphoria. I do, very much so. But so you did, because it sounds like it was very uncomfortable.
I definitely did, and
Okay.
being a lawyer exacerbated that because, when you have to wear a suit, there are different rules in some ways, unofficial rules for men and women in court. For men, it's easy. I mean, you put on a suit and suit jacket and a tie. Women have to, there are more complicated rules, and so I would have to do things like go in with something like a woman's suit or women's shoes, and it was extremely uncomfortable.
I imagine.
Yeah.
And how was that growing up too? Were you always just like really uncomfortable, or?
I was a tomboy.
Okay.
The easy answer is I think I rejected girls' clothes at such a young age. I told my mother one day I just wasn't going to go to school because I wasn't wearing that, and ever since I was just allowed to wear boys' clothes.
And you were allowed to wear, okay, so
Yeah.
was your family supportive, or?
Well, both of my parents, I think, were very surprised.
Okay.
I have parts of my family that are very supportive. I have parts that are extremely unsupportive,
Okay.
which I think is a lot like a lot of transgender
Like
people.
a lot of trans
Yeah.
folks. It's really quite unfortunate. Often drives trans folks to being homeless and desperate, depressed, and suicidal. And do you feel you have a good amount of support now?
I do. I'm lucky. This is where privilege comes into it. I mean, because I'm a lawyer, so I have a certain amount of, I guess, status as being a lawyer.
Sure.
But because I was an adult when I did transition, I already had so many things in place aside from my family. I really feel for teenagers who are, young or younger, who are transitioning, or they're aware that they're transgender and their family rejects them. Because those are the people who really don't have any kind of safety net.
Oh, and I want to believe that the reason that a family would reject their child is in hopes that, they'd come around.
I think that's true, yeah.
Yeah, and what they don't realize is that they're really setting them up to real predators.
Yeah.
To really having them victimized. This child that they brought into the world that they're supposed to care for, you are essentially rejecting them, putting them out there, and that is setting them up to every predator out there. Because you got to survive.
It's terrible, yeah.
It's terrible. And you've done some foster care work and stuff, so can you tell me any not identifying things, but anything that stands out to you?
Well, I'm aware that a much larger portion of foster kids are LGBT, and especially T, than are in the general population. And some of that is because families have rejected youth. A lot of it is. And it's terrible. And the foster system isn't set up to deal with youth in some ways very well at all. I mean, it's an emergency system. And it's not really used to dealing with transgender youth. So then you have transgender youth who are homeless and they're at shelters, and then all of a sudden they wind up in, say, the foster care system. And they have all of these struggles they have to deal with that other youth don't. So it does set them up. I mean, it makes it so it's much harder for them to graduate from college. They are more likely to become pregnant. They are more likely to become addicted to substances. And of course, that sets them up for the rest of their lives.
Failure.
Yeah.
Yeah, sets you up for failure.
Yeah.
Yes, and foster care too. I mean, it's so unfortunate. It doesn't matter if you're in school. As soon as you're 18, you're on your own.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you could be right smack in the middle of high school. Good luck to you.
Yeah. Yeah. If kids are old enough, they may be able to emancipate, but that standard is so hard to meet. In Maine, you have to be self-sufficient and able to take care of yourself and mature, and it has to be in your best interests.
And since we're not even hiring trans adults, it's not too likely we're going to be hiring a lot of trans teenagers to be self-sufficient.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so that's a huge dilemma, and I think that absolutely needs to be pointed out. Something I'm curious only on my own personal level. I didn't know what being trans was. In fact, even when I came out 2.5 years ago, it's ironic. I actually used the term, I know it's really wrong with me. I'm really a man. I still hadn't known transgender. Did you know that you were trans? At what point did you figure it out?
Probably not until I was in my 20s, and it's because I met another transgender person.
Okay.
And at that point, I realized I met this person. I heard their life story, and I realized.
It resonated.
Yeah.
Okay. And how about for you? Has it been a freeing experience?
Very. I think I am a much saner and happier person.
Okay. And I think that's important to know, because there's a lot of misinformation.
Yes.
That people are not happy. And I'm waiting for some more current data to come in, because it seems the data that's available is really quite outdated.
Extremely.
It's extremely outdated, and it's really unfortunate because it gets used as ammunition.
Yeah.
And I think well-meaning people will see this old data and, unintentionally trying to do the right thing, they're doing the wrong thing. And it's setting people up. I know in my own circles that folks who are allowed to transition, who are supported, flourish. They are thriving.
That's true. There's actually a study out about youth, that youth who are allowed to socially transition, which means they're allowed to live as the sex that they know they are, and dress and use the proper pronouns, they actually have much better health outcomes than children who are not allowed to do that. And that could be for a number of reasons, mainly supportive parents, but I think that's important.
I think it's huge.
And I would also, I mean, I have family members who have actually told me, you know, tried to discourage me from transitioning, and were very negative about it and said all the bad things that would happen, and everything they have said has been proven wrong.
Has been wrong.
Yeah.
And truthfully, in my own life, you know, I had been on a host of psychiatric meds, and I have not needed them, because I've just, this liberation for me. I feel almost like I was sort of in a coma, psychological coma, trying to just do my best to conform to what the world wanted. And really, it blunted me. I couldn't do anything. I really couldn't function.
Yeah.
And then when I was able to really reclaim my life, I just, it's amazing what's happened. And I see that to be so true of other folks who are allowed to transition. I mean, it's really wonderful to watch.
Yeah, it's a cliche, the whole born in the wrong body idea, but in some ways it's true. If you think about it, somebody who is not aware that they're transgender or they're not transitioned and they have dysphoria, if they have dysphoria, think about like getting up every morning and knowing that everything about your body and the way you were treated is wrong. And I am not surprised that there are transgender people who have to have different kinds of medical interventions, and then they transition and suddenly
all those medical things go out the window.
That's not true for everyone, obviously, but
No,
for
right.
a lot of people I think it is.
Yes, it is. I agree. And not everyone who's trans feels the need for the modifications.
Absolutely
right.
not.
That they can somehow, if they can transition socially, that's enough for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that's a great thing. I wish I could be like that, to be honest. I wish I didn't need anything, but I do. So.
Well, that's one of the reasons why medical care is so important, and medical coverage, because one of the things that impacts transgender people so much is that a lot of insurance policies and public health policies don't cover transition-related services. And although for some transgender people they can only socially transition, they're fine. Some people need to have actual medical interventions. They need to have hormone treatment or even some sorts of surgeries. And if you can't get coverage for it, that actually makes everything else going on worse.
It certainly does. I know, for example, I've never met a trans man who doesn't want their breasts removed. I have yet to meet someone, which is about a $6,000 procedure. And I think of all the meds that I took to try to cope with this, which was probably $6,000 a month. And so when you think about the cost benefit, you know, I mean, it would be cheaper to just give them what they need.
Yeah, I wish insurance companies would think about that, actually, when they have these exclusions in their policies that say you can't get transition-related services, because if you think about the amount that you're medicating someone for depression or anxiety or other issues, it's going to cost them so much more than just paying for one procedure that can change someone's life.
Change their life, exactly.
Yeah.
And even for me, and I've done a lot of research, and trans men in particular often start rejecting female parts of their anatomy. And not uncommon to get endometriosis or cervical cancers and things like that. Now, interesting, I was also rejecting parts of my body, and I would need to get a shot which was costing $1,000 a month. It was significantly cheaper to just get a hysterectomy. And of course, I'm happy with that. And, you know, so I think about that, you know, if people are thinking, if they want to just bring this down to finances, then it is cheaper really in the long run to give this person the medical procedures they need. This is not, this is not, you know, I'd like a little bit of a nose uplift here.
It's not cosmetic.
Not at all.
That's the difference. Somebody who wants to have cosmetic surgery, they're doing it to improve their appearance. A transgender person is doing it not to improve their appearance. They're doing it because they need their body to match who they are for their mental health.
Who they know themselves to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Oh, I agree. That's great. Yeah, so if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're just wanting to look at it from a financial point of view, honestly, financially, it is advisable and advantageous for us to be helping folks medically. But even on a personal level, when I think about an unfulfilled life, you know, I mean, you can't put a price tag on a meaningful life, and you can't feel good about yourself when you're feeling like crap about your body. And this isn't just a matter of, gee, I'd like to lose a few pounds. This is a real self-hatred.
Yes.
Yeah, that I felt. And you know a little bit about me, and you know that I got a very aggressive breast cancer. And I do present, and sometimes what astounds me is I will let people know that I had 9 months of treatment, and that included 8 hours of chemotherapy. And losing my hair was the least of my problems. And I will still have a trans guy come to me and will say, I wish I'd get cancer. And that's just heartbreaking to me.
Yeah.
Like if they had, when they hear what I've been through, and they would still come to me and say, I would do, and where did you get, you know, your surgery? And what they don't realize is that I got this because of having cancer.
Absolutely, yes. I know of transgender people who have said things like that, or hope that they get uterine cancer, or who have actually tried to, as teenagers, try to actually cut off their breasts. So.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a very real condition for many people. Yes. Zack, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to touch on at all? Either personally or professionally or anything?
No, I don't believe so. I just, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk today about some of the legal issues. And
I really appreciate that. So we're gonna wrap it up. I really want to thank Zack for being here. I want folks to really rethink the way that these bathroom, restroom, changing room issues, to think of this as a trauma dynamic that's going on, and that these changing rooms do need to be trauma sensitive. That's the dynamic. And in 2016, if you're living in Maine right now, keep vigilant. Look out for things that are going on. You can look at websites and such. We want a safer world. And my job, and the whole reason I started this program, was that it didn't matter whether we like each other. It doesn't matter if we approve or if we agree. We do need to be safe. We do need to be inclusive, and we need to be decent. And the reason, really, basically in a nutshell, we are in this together as a society, as just human beings. And I really also want to thank CTN. It's this community television network. You're welcome to use this as a resource to come and learn the equipment and put on your own program, so I'm grateful for that as well. So thank you so much for watching Gender Dignity, Unique and Equal, and look forward to seeing you next month.